Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to start now on the final phase of our production, which is lighting and rendering. You can see here on screen I've got a test render which I did just before. And basically what we're going to end up with is something a little bit similar to this. Basically what we want to do is create just a little environment for our object, a little backdrop. And then basically what we want to do is position the object in a sort of a nice composition and then create an image from it. Now the images aren't going to look exactly like this. This is sort of just a test render to check a couple of settings, and you will notice for example there are some errors such as these black lines running across the backdrop. These lines have been created or triggered by a single setting which I activated by accident, and it was enough to cause these sort of unwanted lines. So what we're going to do is go through how to set up something similar to this, and you can create an image a little bit like this. It'll be up to you how you want to position your object and compose the image overall. What I'm going to do is run through the basic processes to enable you to switch shadows on, for example. You can see I've got the shadow casting off the object. The can has one as well. We can sort of just see it at the back here, but the angle of the camera is blocking most of that shadow. I'm going to show you how to create a little backdrop object and just add some color to that. And basically I'll show you how to create and export the image as a final file, such as a JPEG. So this process is going to go over a couple of videos, and the process is the exact same for both the can and the bottle. So I'm not going to be doing a separate video stream for both of the objects. Basically whichever one you've done, just follow this these couple of videos. The process is pretty much exactly the same. So with that said, let's jump in and begin setting up our scene ready for our render. So you'll see here that I've actually got an empty scene. Okay, this is just a blank scene. Basically I've just switched the software on, and what we're going to do is import our model, either our can or our bottle, or both if you've done both. We're going to import those objects into this file rather than rendering directly from the model file itself. Before I do that, I'm going to make a little backdrop object. So I'm going to start off with a polygon cube like this, and I'm just going to drag basically a rectangle that covers roughly about half the grid like this, and is approximately the same height as the grid is wide. So something like that. Now don't worry about getting this exactly the same size. The scale doesn't really matter, okay, because we're going to adjust that a little bit later. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is add some divisions into this cube. I'm just going to switch to a solid smooth shade like this. So you can press 5 on the keyboard to do that as well. So what I want to do is sort of divide this horizontally across the middle, and then I also want to divide it vertically down the side here. So to do that, I'm going to come across to the channel box and down to the inputs for Polycube 1. And I'll just move the layer panel down a little bit. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the translate X and Z values to 0. And what that'll do is just center the object in the middle of the grid, but it won't move the object up or down. I'm going to leave translate Y as it is, because that's currently what's keeping this object above the grid. I want to keep this object definitely above the grid in this case, because this is going to kind of form the floor that our can or our bottle is going to sit on. Alright, so down here to the inputs now, what I want to do is change the subdivisions for depth and height. So I'm going to change both of those to 3, like that. And what this is doing is it's basically giving me these sort of small polygons, obviously on the sides, and sort of these 3 on the front, top, back, and the bottom. Basically, the main reason for this is that I want an edge here on the back, and I want another one here that are relatively close to this back corner. It's a little bit hard to see with the grid on, so I'll just switch the grid off for a second. So basically what I needed was sort of a bottom panel like this and a back panel with a join just here, and then an edge running here and here. So the easiest way of doing that is to just create these divisions like this. I'm going to select these 3 polygons at the back and then the 3 along the bottom. So I'll right click and select face mode, and then holding shift down I'll just click with the left mouse button on each of those polygons like that. So basically what I want to do is flip this selection around so that these are deselected and everything else on the object, all of these, become selected. So to do that I just hold shift down and left click and drag a box across the entire object like that, and when I let go of the mouse button it flips that selection inside out, or reverses or inverts the selection. Now what I can do is just delete those selected polygons, and I end up with like this little bookshelf shape like this, a little L. So this is basically going to be the floor that our can or our bottle is going to sit on, and this is going to be just like a wall behind them, like just a backdrop. Okay, so if you press 3 on the keyboard you'll see that the shape smooths out, and because it's an open-sided shape, it's not an enclosed cube anymore. The only thing that really changes is this little corner piece here. So you can see now I'm getting this nice soft curve coming from the back down onto the floor. Alright, now the position of these edges here and here, as far as their distance away from this corner edge, will dictate how sharp this curve is. So for example, if I want a more shallow curve, I can select one of the edges, and just using the move tool over here I can just move the edge away, and basically what that'll do is create a more rounded corner. If I push the edge closer in, you can see I start to get a much sharper curve. So you can manually adjust it just by moving this edge or by moving this edge up and down like this. Okay, but really you probably won't have to change any of that at all, given the settings that I've sort of just used. Okay, but you know, that option is always there, so you can have a play around with that. Okay, so I'll just deselect that, right click and select object mode, just so I'm sort of back to this point, and I'll turn the grid back on just so we've got a bit of a reference frame. So we can see the middle of the grid just here. So now what I want to do is reset this object's pivot point to the middle of the grid. Currently it's sitting in the position where the middle of the cube was originally, and I need it to be down here. So what we'll do is we'll turn on snap to grid just here, and that's the X key. If you hold down X, you can see it toggles this on as long as you're holding the key down. So if I kind of hold it down and let it go like this, you can see it turning on and off. What we want is to just switch it on. Okay. The next thing I'll do is hold down the D key. Now what this does is allows me to move the position of an object's pivot point. Okay, this location here. What I'm going to do is click and drag in the little yellow circle in the middle of the manipulator handle. I'll just shift this across so we can see it a little bit more. I just want to grab that yellow handle and drag it to the middle of the grid. And you'll see that because snap to grids are switched on, the handle will actually click from one grid square to the next. So we just want to place it here in the middle. And then you can let go of the D key, and then you can turn snap to grids off. Okay. So the reason that that's important is that I'm going to import my objects now, and they're going to be quite large. In fact, the can's probably going to be about as tall as this backdrop. So what I'll need to do is scale the backdrop up, and by placing the cursor here, or the pivot point I should say, by placing that in the center, I can scale this object up without the bottom floor section dropping below the grid. So that's kind of important. Basically we want the floor to be at the same level as the bottom of the can or the bottle. So let's now import our model. So what we do is go up to File and we go to Import, and it should take us generally to the data folder in our project folder. So we've got TVC can in this case. Now this might be bottle. If you've been working on the bottle, it would be bottle. Normally, it would actually take us directly into this data folder just here, which is empty. If it takes you into there, just go up one folder level to your project folder, and then go down to scenes. Okay, this is where our all of our 3D Maya files are stored. Now, at the moment, they're not showing up because the software is looking for an OBJ file type, which is an object file. What we need to do is just change this to Maya binary, because that's what we've been saving our files as. And you'll see now that those appear. On the Mac, you'll probably find that your files are always visible, but they might be grayed out so you can't select them until you set the dialog box to look for a Maya binary file, or possibly a Maya type file. It tends to word it a little bit differently, but there's an equivalent setting like this on the Mac interface. Okay, so what we need to do now is select our file. For me, that's this TVC CAN 4UV. So whichever your final object is, your completed textured object, that's the one you want to select, and just press open, and it will import. So you can see here that the object is really huge in comparison to the backdrop. So what I want to do is scale the backdrop up so that it sort of forms an environment for the CAN. So I'll just select the backdrop, and I'll grab the scale tool over here on the left, and using the middle handle predominantly, I'm just going to click and drag that to the right, and that's going to scale the backdrop up. Now really, I just need to scale this up enough so that the top of the backdrop is not going to be seen when I'm kind of zoomed in like this. So when I've got the camera roughly in this position that I'm going to take my eventual render from, I can't see the top of the backdrop. Now, to kind of get a bit more of an idea about how big this backdrop needs to be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the display render settings window over here. Just pop that open. And really what I'm going to do is change, in the common tab here, I'm just going to change the image size preset to, let's go with an A4 just here. Okay, so you can see here to put the width in 2480 by 3508. This is a portrait orientation. So the easiest way of reversing the orientation to landscape in this case, basically what we do is we copy one of these two numbers. So I'm just going to copy the width. So I'll just highlight it and hit Command or Control C. So that number is now stored in the computer's memory. And then what I do is type the other number over the top of this one. So what that is, in this case, is 3508. And I just hit Enter. So now currently I've got a square image. So the width and height are the same. Then all I do is go down to the other option, or the other number, and I paste the first number in over the top. So that's just Command or Control V. So that's 2480 now, and just hit Enter. What that's going to do is give me a landscape A4 picture rather than a portrait A4 picture. Okay, so you can see over here that's really not helping at the moment because I still don't know how big that image is going to be in relation to the position of the camera. So what I need to do is come over to this little button just here in my viewport, which is called the resolution gate. It's a little white background with a blue sphere on it. You can also get to that option from the view menu in the viewport down to camera settings, and you can switch on resolution gate just here. So I'll just click that, and you can see we get this green outline box in the viewport, and outside the box is kind of grayed out a little bit. Basically, the picture that we're going to generate is going to be these proportions. Now this isn't the full size of the image because the viewport is actually smaller than the actual A4 page, which the image size is set to at the moment. So this doesn't give you the size of the actual image, it gives you the proportions of the image that will be created. So width versus height. So now what I can do is kind of roughly work out where I'm going to put my camera. Now this isn't the final position, it's just a basic idea. And then what I can do is sort of get the object in the right position. Perhaps I want it sort of over here on this third of the image. Okay, something like that. And then what I do is I just scale like this, the backdrop, and I can also use the stretch, the sort of left to right stretch, which is the x-axis handle, the red one. I can stretch out the backdrop like this. Basically what I want is the backdrop big enough so that it completely covers the entire image. Okay, I don't want any little gaps like this showing up. Alright, so just make sure that your backdrop can actually fill the entire rendered area in. Okay, now we can continue to work, we can kind of zoom out and, adjust things and so on. That's perfectly fine. But later when we're setting our camera position up, what we'll do is kind of have it in somewhere like this, just so we get kind of the model without any of the background, any gaps in the background. Okay. Now for me, because I've done both objects, I'm just going to bring the bottle in as well. So I'm just going to select my, I'm just going to select my can, and if you haven't combined the can, the rivet and the ring pull together, just select all three of those pieces and either click this button just here in the polygon shelf or go to Mesh Combine, and that'll basically make them all into a single selectable object like you see here. I can then just use the move tool and just kind of slide this out of the way. The reason I'm doing this is that the can is sitting in exactly the same spot as the bottle will import to, and it'll be easier for me to select the bottle if the can is just over to the side. Alright, so I'm going to import the bottle, so I'll just go File, Import. Now, I've been using two separate project folders, one for the bottle, one for the can. With you guys, you could probably have all of them in the one project folder system, so they'd all be basically in this scenes folder, for example. I can't do that. For this, I've kept them separate just to organize things a bit better for me. So I'm just going to jump across to my bottle folder now and make sure I'm selecting my binary files, and I've got my final bottle object just there, so I'm just loading that in. So now I've got the can and I've got the bottle. So once again, in the same way that I did with the can a second ago, I'm just going to select all the parts of the bottle. Okay, so that's the label, the bottle, the little seal, and then the cap, and I'm just going to combine them together. Now notice I'm doing that before I move the bottle. That's so that it's in the middle of the grid, and when you do a combine, the pivot point for the object will center in the middle of the grid here. If I'd have moved the object over and then combined it all, the object would have been here, but its pivot point would have been over here. You can see the pivot point here now with the move tool switched on. Okay, so I just want the pivot point to be at the bottom of the object like this. So now I can just arrange these objects. So, for example, I might push this back a little bit, and then I might grab the can and bring that across. And I'm sort of thinking about ways I can set these up in the actual picture. So, if I've got my object about, my camera, sorry, about here, I want to create sort of an interesting composition, So I don't necessarily want this can over here. This looks a bit silly. What I might want is the bottle to be sort of perhaps over here. I'm looking at sort of the thirds of this this document, this image size. So if I divide it up into thirds, so 2 lines sort of down the middle here, I want to put maybe this bottle on one of those thirds. Okay, now that's the rule of thirds is sort of a photography, and it's used in photography and filmmaking and painting and all of lots of different artistic fields, and it's also used for setting up your renders and so on in 3D as well. So that's one of the similarities between sort of traditional art forms, which in some cases are hundreds if not thousands of years old, and the new digital art forms that we've been seeing over the last, say, 20 years or so. So I'm just going to maybe position that there. Now, if I wanted another can or another bottle, I can, rather than just importing another one, what I would do is duplicate one of these existing ones. So I could just go Edit, Duplicate, like that, and that's placed the duplicate on top of the original. And then I just use the move handle and just shift it out of the way. So what I can do here, for example, is I can rotate that around. So maybe I want a can lying on its side. So with the rotate tool turned on, if I hold down the J key, I can then just rotate this sideways. Now the J key is going to make the rotate tool snap to a certain number of degrees incrementally, and in this case by default it's set to 15 degrees, so I can rotate it around, and I know now that this is actually exactly on 90 degrees to the floor, which means basically I can have this can lying on sort of sideways on the floor. Now if you're not too sure whether or not it's actually hovering above the floor like this, you can tap your spacebar and have a look in the side or the front view. So there's the floor level, and I can see that the can is floating a little bit, so I'll just use the move tool and just move it down a little bit like that. Now I can use the top view as well, so what I might do is have this can on its side, but maybe it's on an angle like this, so the back end of the can is actually behind this other can like this. So you can see now this composition is becoming a lot more interesting. I'm getting these multiple height layers, and I'm also getting these kind of like this step effect with obviously the layouts becoming wider. So it's starting to kind of have a nice sort of positional flow through here. Once again, I'm sort of working on, this is on a vertical third, and this can here is almost lying along a horizontal third. So I'm sort of employing that rule of thirds. Okay. So basically, I'm just going to have this sort of as my basic setup. Okay, this is going to be my basic composition. Now the camera position is not final, but I'm sort of just placing it here to get a bit of an idea of what the layout is going to look like. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do with this background, these objects are very, very close to this back wall. So I think what I might do is take my scale tool and just scale the backdrop out a little bit like this. Okay, you can see that that's stretching out. You don't want these too close to the back wall because you don't necessarily want the shadows that are cast off these objects to appear on the back wall. You sort of want them maybe more on the floor. So just having a larger gap between the objects and the wall will make sure that those shadows don't creep up too far. Okay, so we're going to end up with something along these lines like this with our final composition. Okay, I'm going to leave this video here. In the next video we're going to add colouring to the floor. You can see obviously on the test render that I added green to the backdrop, and that was just to keep it in theme with the bottle label and so on. We're going to add a light into the scene, which will allow us to not only illuminate the object but also cast shadows, just to add a little bit more interest and detail. And then we'll basically set some render settings up, and hopefully by the end of the video we can actually start the rendering process. Just a very quick heads up, I just wanted to point out that this test render, which at full size, this is currently zoomed out to fit this window, but if I press this 1:1 display real size button, you'll actually get a bit of an idea of the scope of the size of this image. You can see that the actual image itself is really huge, much bigger than a real life A4. It's basically scaled up to 300 dpi, so we can print this and it'll actually print really, really nicely. You can see the little normal map details on the top of the can here, for example, and you can also see the bottle is reflecting in the can just down here. The main thing I wanted to point out was that this render down here, you can see that the render took just under 55 minutes. So this image actually took basically an hour to generate. Now keep in mind that during that time I could not use Maya. Basically when the software is rendering like this, you can't use it, so you can't be doing other things with the Maya software. So I just wanted to mention that you'll need to keep in mind you will need to set time aside in order to get your renders done. You have to include the render time in the actual deadlines for your work when you're doing jobs for clients. It's not additional time on top of your deadline. So keep in mind that some of these pictures might take anywhere upwards of an hour to actually export, generate, so that you can export them. All right, it's a lengthy process sometimes. Okay, so as I said, we'll leave this here, and I'll see you in the next video for the lighting and render settings.